Okay, um, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Hong. I am the director of the Center for Racial Justice, along with my co-organizer, Becca Covarrubias, Associate Professor of Psychology, and the members of our planning team, Taylor Ainsley, Domingo Canizales, Chisa Hughes, and staff at the Institute for Social Transformation. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the inaugural event of a three-part series, Transforming Structures of Whiteness in University Leadership. I'd like to thank the members of the planning team, my co-organizer, as well as our co-sponsors, the Institute for Social Transformation, and all the divisional deans. Jasmine Allender of the Humanities, Celine Pereñas Shimizu of the Arts, Catherine Mitchell of the Social Sciences, Paul Koch of Physical and Biological Sciences, and Alex Wolf of Engineering for their co-sponsorship of the entire series. In addition to today's event, which is titled Enacting Solidarities, Faculty, Staff, Affinity Groups Report Back, this series includes two forthcoming events scheduled for next quarter. On April 1st, Calling Out Whiteness in University Structures of Leadership, and tentatively on May 13th, please stay tuned, Recognizing Invisible Labor in the University Ways Forward. This series takes its inspiration from Becca Covarrubias and Kat Quinteros's deeply important study, which I believe that most of us have read, Calling Out Whiteness, Exposing and Reforming Structures of Whiteness in University Leadership. This is posted alongside other materials on the CRJ website. This is a series that has long been in the works. Today's event will feature brief report backs from the chairs of the 6 faculty community networking groups. Most of these date back in inception to fall of 2018. We also have a new group. It's disabilities and chronic illness. Following the presentations, we're going to open up the floor to Q&A. In the interest of maximizing discussion time, I will offer the briefest of introductions and just note that the chairs will present in the order in which I'm going to introduce them. So I'd like to begin by introducing Courtney Bonham, Assistant Professor in Psychology and CRES, who chairs the African American Black Caribbean Group. I'd also like to introduce L.S. Kim, Associate Professor in Film and Digital Media, who chairs the Asian American Pacific Islander Group. I'd like to introduce Megan Moody, Associate Professor of Anthropology, who chairs Disabilities and Chronic Illness. I'd like to introduce Katie Keli'ia'a, who is Assistant Professor of Feminist Studies, who chairs the Indigenous Group. I'd like to introduce as well Kirsten Silva-Gruz, Professor of Literature, who chairs the Latinx Chicanx group. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Braslau, Professor of Chemistry, who chairs the Women in STEM group. If you want to read longer bios, please check out the event announcement on the CRJ website, where you can find aggregated the directory profiles of today's presenters. And I also want to briefly editorialize and say that it's no coincidence that 8 women faculty are presenting or facilitating today's event, and that includes Becca Covarrubias and me, and only 2 of this group are full professors. 2 are still assistant professors. I just want to point out that even as we could be marshaled to sort of demonstrate the diverse face of UC Santa Cruz as an institution and its supposed strides to supporting DEI and campus leadership, the fact that we're doing this work speaks as well to persistently unaddressed structural issues that still bedevil this institution. So one of the hopes of today's event was to provide a public forum so that we can learn what each of these groups has been doing and the findings and recommendations, if any, that they have put forward. The ultimate goal of this series is to shift policy and practice on this campus. I want to point out that at the end of the very first year that these groups were running, all of the groups filed reports. And these are publicly available, but there's still a sense that somehow these reports were perhaps sort of stuck in a dusty filing cabinet in the basement of Kerr Hall. And even though these reports are now several years old, their recommendations read not just as a blueprint for faculty retention, but also for student success on a campus whose student demographics have changed drastically over the past decade. So I just want to point out that running as a through line in these reports were the following issues: invisible or unacknowledged forms of service, labor, and identity taxation that befalls faculty of color, women of faculty in STEM, and I'd also add faculty who have disabilities, even though that group wasn't existing when these reports were initially filed. And one of the statements that repeated in the different reports is that students seek faculty who look like them. The other issue that runs as a through line is that minority faculty are being forced to represent in the arena of service, thus leading to lower salaries and stalled career advancement. And another issue that ran as a through line was just basically the recommendation that there have to be measures, and these are urgent measures that have to be undertaken to diversify faculty, and the recommendation that there should be an institutionalization of faculty of color pipelines. And so in terms of ground rules for today's event, basically there's an open chat. You can feel free to make use of it throughout today's event. At the end, after the presentations are over, please raise your hand to pose a question or make a comment, or make free use again of the chat for this purpose. To limit outside noise, you will not be able, as a member of the audience, to unmute yourself during the presentations, but during the Q&A, you will have that ability. So without further ado, I turn things over to Courtney.
Thank you, Christine. So just a caveat, I have a 4-month-old and I may need to turn my camera off toward the latter part of our time together to feed her, but I'll still be able to participate in the conversation. Also, you might hear her in the background. Okay, so I'm going to just talk informally about many of the themes that have come up among members of the faculty community networking programs, Black faculty group. We meet once monthly and just get together and chat and catch up with each other. But part of what we also do is talk about some challenges that we face and then ideas for how to address those challenges, what the university could do to address those challenges. So some of I've organized, so also I just want to put the caveat that not every single Black faculty member has made each of these comments, but these are comments that have come up throughout the time that I've been chair. So, we're not a monolith. There's variation in how we think about these ideas, but these are comments that have come up. And I've organized some of the themes that we've talked about into 4 main sections. So, each section is a recommendation. So the first section is that we need to better support Black faculty. We need to better support Black students is the second area. And then the third is that we need to centralize DEI leadership. And the fourth is that we need to enhance DEI leadership accountability within the university. And this is not a formal, my comments aren't in the form of a formal report right now, but these ideas are expanding on the report from our group that was submitted by the previous chair in 2019. And we'll be sharing a report at the end of this year too that includes many of these ideas. So when thinking about supporting Black faculty, I think I accidentally just muted myself. But when thinking about supporting Black faculty, we really need to invest in Black faculty community by recruiting, hiring, promoting, and retaining more Black faculty. And just for context, 13% of the US population is Black, 5% of the California population is Black, 4% of UCSC undergrads are Black, and then 3% of UCSC graduate students, lecturers, and ladder rank faculty are Black. So we are underrepresented. So, that's like first and foremost, there needs to be more of us. We need more so that we can better serve both our graduate and undergraduate student populations and to support just a thriving, engaged community among Black faculty. And we need to recruit more Black faculty across all programs. And one way so we have lots of examples of how this could be done or be achieved. So a couple ideas are to create a more fully funded version of the UC Chancellor's postdoctoral fellowship program at UCSC. We should begin requiring departments to engage in best practices aimed at reducing racial discrimination in hiring. So even if racial biases are playing a role, despite the best of intentions on the part of individuals making hiring decisions. So like 3 examples of best practices are require departments to use clear rubrics for evaluating job candidates, require search committees to screen applicant diversity statements first before reading the other statements that they've submitted, and then encourage departments to write broader job ads whenever possible to afford more flexibility in hiring stellar candidates from underrepresented groups. Another idea was to create cluster hires in critical race and ethnic studies and Black studies. Those hires would also enable our university to offer courses that Black students have asked for in the Black studies minor. Recently, there's been an announcement of this initiative to hire 100 new faculty, and diversifying the faculty was a stated goal. So is there more, we're wondering, is there a more specific commitment to hiring more Black faculty and other faculty of color? How can cluster hires be worked into this initiative? We had more questions too, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. It would also be great to create more communication, just ensuring all departments know about the hiring incentive that's tied to the UC President's and Chancellor's postdoctoral fellowship program. So we feel like that's an underutilized program. And then also housing comes up a lot in our meetings, and difficulty around housing. So we really have talked a lot about how UCSC's recruitment strategy needs to acknowledge that in a country where a typical white family's wealth is 10 times the wealth of a typical Black family, there are going to be systematic racial differences in the extent to which new hires can afford and access adequate housing near Santa Cruz. So, we need some strategies to address that dynamic. And some ideas included just more faculty housing with more varied types of housing, including rental units. All faculty should be told about the faculty recruitment allowance program, and the amount needs to be increased so that it can actually make a dent in a down payment for a home. So there are more specific ideas around housing that we had too. But I'm going to move on to the next section. So that whole section kind of dealt with recruiting and hiring faculty. But we also think that efforts need to be made to promote and retain Black faculty as well. So some ideas, one of the most important themes in this section centered around institutionalizing processes that can make invisible labor visible. And so that invisible labor for Black faculty often includes supporting Black students in ways that don't show up in evaluations of our teaching and research. It can also include educating colleagues about racial dynamics, or even participating in efforts to recruit Black faculty who are outside of our department. We've talked about this labor being things that we have to do in order to create a work environment that we can survive in. but also it includes work that we want to do, that we feel it's our charge to do, especially when it comes to mentoring and community building. So really what we would like to see the processes being institutionalized that translate this labor that we hope will be made more visible into material awards, like appropriately weighing this labor in the tenure promotion and merit review processes. And then it would be also great to have more clarity around how the diversity statements in our review materials are evaluated and weighed. One other idea was to have a second chair role funded for our faculty group. So instead of it just being one chair, it would be co-chairs to help actually bring all of these ideas for advocacy efforts into fruition and create more collaborations across different relevant groups on campus to boost community engagement. There's more I could say around that, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. We've talked a lot about mentoring too, and needing to create more formal mentoring structures that include Black faculty. The faculty mentoring program is a great structure, but if Black faculty, like who come in as junior people, are requesting Black faculty mentors, like there just aren't enough Black faculty mentors to go around. So just more formal structures, maybe collaborating across universities within the UC system could be helpful. How much time do I have left? Is anybody timing?
I think 1.5 minutes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we also, have talked a lot about supporting more, doing more to support Black students. So one thing that we've been wondering about is what kind of progress has been made toward addressing BSU's revised unrelenting anti-Blackness demands. And that was a letter that was sent out in May of 2021. So it'd be great to get an update on that from like a formal update from the administration. We've talked about the need to devote resources to creating a Black Graduate Student Association and think creatively so that BGSA leadership will be able to actually contact other Black graduate students on campus, maybe even before they come to campus, arrive to campus. And then creating a fellowship program for PhD students from groups that are underrepresented within academia would be helpful. Stanford's DARE program, it's called Diversifying Academia Recruiting Excellence, is one model for this. I was a part of that. I know there's one other faculty member in my department who was a part of that. So just more avenues for support for underrepresented PhD students. Those are a couple examples. And then one thing that we also have talked about, and it was great to hear this announcement recently this week, is the need to hire a vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our university, who has really a strong theory of change for our university, one that's focused on diversity as a moral issue and not just an instrumental issue, not just something that's good for everybody, but that is a tool. Diversifying the university is a tool for rectifying generations of systemic racism within our country and knowledge production systems. So I think I'll stop there, and maybe I can weave in some other ideas into our conversation as we talk.
Thank you so much, Courtney. LS?
Yes, thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Christine, Taylor, Domingo, and thank you all for being here. I think in some ways, Courtney offered really helpful and specific suggestions and ideas and gave a sense of the realms in which we are working. In the spirit of enacting solidarities, I want to also say that your presence and your willingness to help us with the work is important, because there is so much work to be done. There's so much work that the chairs and the past chairs have been doing. And so what I'd like to do is just give you a sense of, kind of the ramp up and then the particular concerns that the AAPI faculty, and I've added staff to our group, right? The more, the better. I also want to open with the idea that there is this tension, right? Thank you, Christine, for pointing out the irony or the reality that here we are, female faculty of color who really are working hard on this along with members of our group, and that there is this tension because I remember, Christine, early in our first year of meetings, you offered this warning, which was about doing the work that the university needs to be doing. And so I think the tension is how much, do we do, which we're willing to do, and how much and how do we invoke the university, right? If you will, if we're going to be talking about goodwill, to partner with us, because it is about the labor and the burden and from whence does the change come. So I want us to kind of keep that in mind because I'll close with a question, but I have some information and some slides to share. Just a few. It's an amalgamation of a couple of presentations that I've made. I'd like to give a shout out to Judy Scott. She and I went to the UCOP conference in 2019. And so I have a few slides from those. So this program, for those of you who are not familiar, is called the Ucsc Faculty Community Networking Program. VPAA Herbie Lee and his office, along with the EVC, founded it. It was founded in the fall of 2018. We didn't have our first meetings until winter quarter 2019. So, we're just 2-3 years old, if you will. And it began as affinity groups, necessarily so. We had to find each other. I had to create an email list. And one good thing that I think all the groups were grateful for is, it's no small thing to be able to gather and to be able to share and then also to begin to converse and strategize. And so the first year, we really generated all the groups, right? Issues of concern. The second year, we were able to meet with the chancellor. We were one of, I think, just 2 groups that were able. It was the TA strike and then the pandemic, to have a forum with the chancellor to present our concerns, our stories, our perspectives, and particular requests. As Christine mentioned, after the first year, each of us wrote a policy paper. Then there was also a joint statement. And, I think it's important, that we come together today and the chairs continue to make, right, to create a solid stage for which we reiterate the needs and the requests to the upper administration. But right here are the major concerns: the invisible forms of service labor, the overcommitment, often by faculty of color and female faculty. And you will hear this, I think, throughout today's meeting, the need for the hiring pipeline, and to institute ways that there's recruitment as well as retention, because one of the many kind of notes that came up in the course of the conversations with the AAPI faculty and staff group is an exodus of AAP faculty and staff. So a key issue is to have this direct line of communication between Asian American faculty and staff and the administration. We can always send an email message. And I really appreciate Chancellor Larive has personally emailed me back a number of times, but we're talking about a structural line of communication. Key concerns: faculty retention and recruitment, leadership training and selection, the work culture, the campus climate. That's something that has been addressed recently. The tricky, fraught diversity discourse, which we may enter in our conversation today. And then particularly for AAPI faculty and staff, and students, we're interested in outreach beyond the university. But I also want to mention, in the establishment of this program in the first place, the AAPI group just, perhaps it was Herbie Lee who extended the invitation to us, but we happen to be part of the program because we are not categorized as underrepresented. And to me, that is a major problem because, I use the word minority. We are a minority group, but we're not categorized as underrepresented. So we're placed in this, kind of position. So I just have two bits of data to show you. And this is also illustrating, right, the independent work, the voluntary work that AAPI faculty and staff are doing towards, right, change and towards making things happen. So before our forum with the chancellor, we gathered a fair amount of data and just 2 slides. So I think this is not unlike, for example, the Latinx group. The number of AAPI undergraduates, international students as well, has grown significantly, dramatically. The AAPI, Senate faculty has not. So the burden of, if we are assuming, and to a certain degree it is true, that AAPI faculty and staff serve AAPI students and Asian international students, we're really, really being stretched. And, as Courtney mentioned, how does any of this get counted or credited or recognized? This is from 2020, and the data was from, at that time, up until 2018. You can see here, right? So we need more Asian Americans in upper administration. An update, gladly, is joining VPA Herbie Lee, Bijou Kamal-Swaran as interim AVC for finance, Christina Ravelo is now Associate Dean of DEI and PBSci. And then just last week, there was an announcement about ANFAM joining the CPEVC's office, and thanks to Associate Campus Provost Adrian Brassavano and Adrian Harrell, who helped with this hire. I think I'm going to stop with the slides. I also want to mention that, I also want to mention that you heard me say, right, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Asian International, faculty, staff, students. I mean, this is a huge, relatively speaking, group, right, or set of groups. And so part of our challenge is the ways in which we find other campus entities who are able to address and help the different groups. So we're a large group, and in some ways that's reassuring and exciting, but it also makes it very complex in terms of different needs that need to be met. I'll reiterate a couple of things because I want to be able to share the time, but in terms of our original asks in the policy paper in 2019 after our first year, 2 have been addressed, which is great. One is equity advisors. So there is now a program, being developed. We also, and Courtney mentioned this, noted that our campus was the only UC campus that did not have a vice chancellor of DEI. And the search has been deferred, but recently an announcement has been made that the search is on. And so, I simply want to acknowledge that a few of our initial major concerns, in the past 2 years have been addressed. But clearly there is so much more that continues to be. And so what I leave us with in our gathering today is that there's a question about what kind of relationship our groups can have with the administration, right? Because so much of the work is informal, if not invisible, and that we're gathering data and information, and we're having the conversations, and we're identifying what needs to be done. So now, how do we, right, work with the administration to take next steps? And so, that's a question that I pose to us all. I just want to reiterate the 3 issues, particularly for the AAPI faculty and staff group that we have before us: recruitment and retention, leadership training, and then I didn't have a chance to elaborate, but an ombudsman or person, because there have been cases, particularly in the context of the pandemic, where faculty have experienced anti-Asian aggression and not knowing where to go, who to report to, how to get help. And I'm glad that the faculty members have felt that they could come to our group, right? But our group is barely official. So we need now to strengthen and build the connections to the official structures, to have more recognition, right, as groups, and to not simply advise. It's important to advise, but again, right, that's sort of informal, but to have more formal connections to the administration and to the administrative structures. Thank you.
Thank you, LS. I just wanted to add too that with the announcement that there will be a search for a VC of DEI position, there was also the mention that I believe Herbie Lee will be conducting listening tours. So this is a time when we can weigh in. And I think it's really important for everyone on this campus to have a comparative sense of what powers other VCs of DEIs across the UC system have. At UCLA, the VC of DEI has a say in terms of FTE approval. I understand from Lori Klutzer that the VC of DEI here will not have that power. So I just want to point out that there are comparative differences, even if the title is the same. I would like to pass things over to Megan. Yes, thank you.
Hi, thanks everybody. I especially want to say thank you to all of my fellow chairs, and just at the outset say that this event is really around racial justice. And so there's a way in which the group with disabilities and chronic illness, while we are, and I'll talk about it in a second, it's very important to us to take a truly intersectional approach to thinking about diversity on our campus. We also just want to articulate a deep commitment to racial justice here. So I thought we are a brand new group, and I thought that I would just briefly talk about the rationales behind the founding of this group. There were two main issues that arose, and I'll talk a bit about the context in a moment, but in some ways, disabled faculty are one of the least represented contingents in the entire educational apparatus. Current estimates are that about 30% of our incoming students claim an identity that a disability that requires some kind of accommodation. So while 30% of students are disabled, the best estimate right now is that 1.5 to 4% of faculty identify as having a disability. We did not even collect disability statistics on applicants until the group I was a part of last year actually started agitating around this. And the 1.5% number comes from a Freedom of Information Act request that had to be filed by my colleague Karen Nakamura at UC Berkeley several years ago. We, in fact, do have disability statistics, and I'm happy to talk about that. Folks do actually report at the time of applying to our campus whether they have a disability, but there have been all sorts of reasons that we haven't attended to those numbers. And I think it's possible that the representation gap might be one of them because it's pretty stark. So the other thing, just to note there, one of our tasks, I think in general, as we think about how to practically go about the projects of equity and diversity on our campus, is that disability is covered by an entirely different legal framework, actually, than Proposition 209. And so there are many ways in which, if the campus wants to make a commitment to hiring disabled candidates and veterans, there is a strong federal push for affirmative action in these areas, and we would be well within the legal bounds in the state. Well, and so the other thing I wanted to say, thank you, Rebecca, in terms of representation, the last point I'll make is that we are the only group through which all of you might pass at some point in your time here. Any one of the faculty could become a member of our group. And indeed, our primary task right now is balancing the great need for basic support and staff. Thank you, Rebecca. The entire community. The basic need for support, because it won't be any surprise for me to say that we are in a deeply ableist profession. And for folks who are not visibly disabled, the shame and stigma is considerable. So just having a place where people could come, we will not have our list be public. We will not have bios online, because we have to maintain a space where it's safe for people to come and actually talk about things that are still considered deeply shameful in our field. So we're weighing the kind of need for just everyday support with some of the opportunities that arise from these groups for advocacy. The other just, I think, thing to mention about how the group was founded is it in part came out of work that I did with some amazing colleagues last year that was funded by the same program that funded Rebecca's research, and also the founding of these community networks, which is the Advancing Faculty Diversity program out of the Office of the President. And last year, I had the great privilege of chairing a work group drawn from across campus. This is the origin of the Equity Advocate program. And I want to highlight that just really briefly for to speak to LS's point and about how these things can work. The push within the AFDW group last year towards creating an equity advocacy program came from the chairs of these groups. That was a need that our work group heard articulated by the chairs of the faculty community networking groups that then got blended into the work that we were doing. So I also want to say, in a way, you did that. So thank you. That's some of the origin of some of the positive things that are happening. And just as a note, I've put a link to the documents that we created last year in the chat. Our collaborators at Merced were very kind in formatting them for us. There is a common sense and common sense 10 common sense arguments against equity initiatives. And at the bottom, you'll also find links to annotated bibliographies. And I would especially draw your attention to the bibliography on noting service work. To my other chairs, please share this with all of your members. That was created by Jean Foxtree from Psychology, and it is a super, super important document. There's also our top 12, if you're going to read them, about how to pursue faculty diversity. Please read those articles. So I think we, as a disabled faculty, just have a long way to go in terms of even making it clear that we exist, and that structurally we are not limited to issues of medical leave. Disability is not always a medical question. And if we had two requests, I think we would like to have an advisory council similar to the one that exists at UC Berkeley, that it consists of faculty, staff, students, to talk about accessibility on campus. And I think we would really like a staff person entirely dedicated to faculty accommodation, because right now we have one office and one person handling accommodation needs for the entire campus. And we would like a dedicated faculty staff person. Thank you.
Megan, thank you so much. I want to say a couple of things. One is that those incredible resources that you shared over email with us, we will place those under events on the CRJ website. We'll make sure that those are available. So the Jean Fox Tree bibliography that you just mentioned, we'll make sure that that is accessible to all. And the second thing too is just a reminder that the rubric of today's event is thinking through solidarity. So how do we think in solidarity toward the recommendations that are being put forward? And as Megan was mentioning, when another campus has a model, definitely let's bring those up. And, only 2 of these groups have ever met with the chancellor and the EVC. And it's not clear whatever happened to the recommendations that were put forward. And so this is a moment when we can think about how do we put some oomph behind our recommendations, and how do we work and move forward in solidarity with each other. Okay, let me just see. I'm trying to follow my alphabetical order. Katie, you're on.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here and really offering this space. I think it's a really important conversation. About my position here, I am currently the chair of the Indigenous Faculty Network. I often call it IFN. It's just an easier thing to say. I've actually been a part of IFN since I was a postdoc here at UC Santa Cruz, and it was actually very much a recruitment tool for me. I immediately was able to be tapped into a group of really wonderful faculty who supported me along the way. Excuse me, I have dry mouth today. Our group is about a dozen of us, and we are across all different kinds of levels within the university. So there's, there are staff members in our organization, lecturers, faculty across all levels, and we even have non-Native folks in our organization who work closely with the Amamutsun tribe. Excuse me. Since our launch, which was pretty shortly after I arrived here at Santa Cruz, we had lunches, and it was very much kind of a social, really affinity group. And one of the biggest things is that our organization has really changed into something that is definitely more service oriented. And that's kind of been part of our bigger discussions, and a lot of what everybody's spoken to about thinking about invisible labor, invisible service, and how does all of that count? I myself am junior faculty. This is just my second year, and I am, very much aware that this organization is kind of changing into something. So what I want to talk about first is what has happened in the last years since IFN started. And that is that 3 IFN members, that's Judy Scott, Rainier Ramirez, and also Eve Chavez, they were directly involved with the UCOP funded Critical Mission Studies project. And that project is actually wrapping up right now. And Rainier is currently drafting a report, in their own words, Amamutsun Truth-Telling, California Missions, Cultural Resurgence and Decolonization. And that will be published as part of the Critical Mission Studies Handbook. So already there's a lot of sort of focus on place-based learning within our organization, and thinking about how we privilege California Indian histories and California Indian perspectives in the work that we do as an organization. And I would say part of the biggest success of these initiatives is the fact that the Indigenous Faculty Network has a really strong relationship with the Amamutsun Tribal Band, and specifically Chairman Val Lopez. And we have worked as an organization to try and secure things for him that allow him to come to campus and do all the service that he does. For example, a parking pass, a place to stay, just these basic kinds of needs that we can attempt to try and meet to allow that relationship to continue and to really foster that relationship. And as I said, as a group, we really privileged place-based learning in California Indian perspectives. And our group members were involved with and present for the removal of the bells on campus and within UC Santa Cruz, meaning the mission bells, throughout the city. And in addition to the Critical Mission Studies project, members of our org also developed an Indigenous Slugs Present GE course. It was kind of like an Indigenous Studies intro course that was designed to be taught by different faculty throughout periods of weeks. Unfortunately, that did not come to fruition, but I know that the faculty who created that are really eager to see that in the near future here on campus. So hopefully that's something we could potentially roll out. But Judy Scott, wonderful chair, former chair of Indigenous Faculty Network, she created a really wonderful report. And this was from our 2018-2019 year, so just in the beginning. But some of the three main recommendations that were established in the report was to first develop a long-term plan for recruitment and retention of Indigenous faculty. Second is to support campus events and activities that support the local Indigenous community. Again, you know, the notion of working with and continuing to collaborate with the Amamutsun Tribal Band. And then third, to support events that build cohesion across groups and campuses. So those were the main ones from the report. And I feel like there's already some new ones because we really have been kind of hitting the ground running in these last pandemic years as we've been meeting monthly through Zoom. But overall, Indigenous Faculty Network has grown into a dynamic hub that has built and fostered a community where we can feel comfortable with one another and share and learn from our experiences across campus. In the last decade, we've built upon our existing Native faculty through the UC Presence postdoc program. So we brought through Sim Schneider, Eve Chavez, and most recently myself. And we really hope to continue that trend. We see that, you know, California Indian Studies is really kind of brewing, and Indigenous Studies as well. I feel like there's been a lot more attention to Native American Indigenous Studies, and we are hoping to continue to, you know, really harness that movement and really trying to get more folks here on campus through the PPFP. And through our group organizing, we have assisted with the recent Indigenous Studies hires and are developing a Native American and Indigenous Studies major. That is our plan. We hope to bring that out. One of the things that we've noticed through the Native students here on campus is they're constantly looking for, you know, a major or even a minor that could really put together their passions. And right now, that is not the case. So we're hoping to build towards that. And on top of that, we are really hoping to see an Indigenous Studies cohort or cluster hire in the future. I think there's really a potential and an interest, and that would be really exciting. And I think it would really speak to a lot of the recruitment and retention efforts that all groups are talking about broadly during this discussion. And that being said, Indigenous Faculty Network started as an affinity-based group, but has steadily developed into a more sort of service-oriented organization, fielding requests from administrators, et cetera, for kind of all things Indigenous. And in light of this often invisible service, our group and individuals would like to ensure that our increasing involvement in diversity initiatives across campus is both recognized and compensated. And I think there's definitely interest in, you know, absolutely doing that. But I think overall, what I'm hearing from other folks that have spoken is the need to, you know, make sure that these are structurally, recognized things, and that there are structures that allow us to do this work, to be recognized for this work. And if need be, hiring other individuals to, again, to try to facilitate this type of work and labor that is really crucial and important. And that being said, I've just really enjoyed my time in the Indigenous Faculty Network, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today and think about how we continue to, build these initiatives across campus. And just thank you so much for having this conversation.
Katie, thank you so much. You know, I just wanted to underscore the news that came out recently from EVC Klutzer, which is that there will be 100 new faculty lines and 200 will be replaced. And isn't this an occasion for us to really think about the significance of the cluster hire that Katie and others have mentioned? So like if we're thinking really critically and broadly about this particular historical moment, I think that this conversation that we are having couldn't be more timely. And then I also want to underscore the other point too, which is that IFN, the faculty on IFN have done so much heavy lifting in terms of enormous service work in outsized ways. This is true of every single one of the groups, but I think particularly so given the faculty numbers on IFN. And so how do we start to really think about the compensation, the material compensation of invisible labor, the refusal, I think that we should all refuse just the automatic slotting of that into service, not to discount service at all, but I think that we need to have a broader conversation. And this is just another plug for the third in the series, which is about recognizing invisible labor. This conversation is to be continued. We will be in conversation with people from other UC systems, as well as people from on campus who have proposed solutions to what has up to now seemed to be an intractable structural problem. I'd like to pass things over to Kirsten.
Hi, thank you. Is my connection stable? Is everyone hearing me? Okay, yes. Awesome. So I am just stepping in as the head of the Latinx Chicanx faculty community networking group. Juan Poblete led it for 2 years and helped the group do two very valuable things. One was our 2019 report with 5 priorities, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the second was a follow-up survey of Latinx faculty on campus. About 39 people responded to that survey, and I'm going to just share my screen and share some results from that. And my mailing list, my self-compiled mailing list for the group is about 70. So that number, roughly half of the that group has regularly. Let's see. Could someone let me share? I'm not able to share. Oh, wait, maybe I am. There we go. Okay. So we have about half of the number of potential opt-in people participating in the group, not attending every monthly meeting, but on a pretty regular basis and responding to this survey. So that's a pretty robust group. So some of the things that I wanted to highlight in this survey is that there's a pretty mixed record in terms of the way the Latinx faculty report finding the campus to be a supportive and inclusive place for faculty. But interestingly, we perceive that it's even less supportive and inclusive for Latinx staff, grads and undergrads, and 100% of the respondents feel that the administrative representation of Latinx folks is inadequate. And I know that's the topic for another meeting of this group. On the positive side, a lot of respondents to this survey felt that being at UC Santa Cruz had a really positive impact on their ability to collaborate and to do collaborative research. So that was some good news that emerged, but it was low on time and support, both financial and otherwise, in terms of grant support, staff to help with grant applications. And that one of the major depressive factors on that satisfaction was a sense of a maldistribution of teaching load, as well as service. So in the service category, we got similar findings to the other things. So in this question, this was a follow-up to that 2019 report where we put out 5 recommendations to the administration. Our meeting with the EVC was canceled a couple of times in the COVID year, so we have not had that opportunity yet. But the number one wish among the 5 ranked areas was for a strategic Latinx faculty cluster hire. And then behind that, attention to, and this has been a constant between all these presentations, how faculty service is measured, compensated, and considered for advancement. With the inauguration of, as Megan described, the Faculty Equity Advocate Program, we're very hopeful that situation will keep getting better. The third thing, the Research Center for the Americas, which is a premier center for faculty research, for undergraduate research opportunities, for graduate student mentoring, and for really guarding the pipeline of creating new Latinx scholarship. That center does not have permanent funding. And has always been struggling to keep its staff going. So that is at a critical juncture. And other mentorship programs in the years since then, the HSI Initiatives Office has been working on some really exciting new programs, some that are disciplinarily specific. But that office also does not have permanent staffing. And so there are new initiatives like this Mellon Foundation, Crossing Latinidades, but no one really to help the faculty here apply to start working on those pipeline initiatives, which would involve graduate students. So here are a few slides that Juan has used effectively in his HSI campus work. So here's the stark contrast between the share of California population, that's not even school-age population, which is higher than 39%, the laddering faculty, lecturers only a tiny bit better, and then the staff and grad students. And here's his graph broken down in the two divisions of arts and humanities. And you can find all of this at the UC Employee Diversity database site. Here it is by PB Sci. And can you see the right side of this slide also? I hope. There's a domestic international breakdown that really gets in the way of our ability to track how many of the self-described Latinx students and faculty identify as belonging to the largest ethno-national groups in California, Mexican and Salvadorian. So that's something that anecdotally students have talked about. We've had some discussion about the framing of Latinx Chicanx. Chicano studies has a particular history both here on campus and in the state. So the really bad news is that this 10% at UCSC is higher than the system-wide average, which is only 8%. And I did this chart quickly to look at how UCSC stacks up in terms of its ladder faculty Latinx representation next to, sorry, that should be UCSB, the other UC campuses that are currently HSIs, which is Santa Barbara, Riverside, UCI, and UC Merced. Of those, the first three are all R1 universities, as we are. Merced is not, but look at their 16%, which is helping bring the system averages up. I was shocked to find that the CSU average is not much better. But I think because the administration has mentioned so often the struggle of being both an HSI and an R1, I poked around a little bit to see whether it was in fact true that being a Research One university or a member of the AAU meant that it was just really, really hard to find strong enough Latinx faculty. And so these are some of the peer institutions for which I could find information. Who are also involved in this Mellon group of AAU members that are also HSIs. And we can see here that Texas and New Mexico institutions and even University of Illinois at Chicago are doing much better. Florida International, 29.5% ladder faculty identify as Latinx, and UTEP, it's even higher than this 29.7%. So Texas also has a huge disparity. They have this breakdown as described what they call the representation gap between the composition of faculty and students. And I think we can look at that number really starkly in California too. And we reiterate that our number one concern is to have a strategic targeted Latinx faculty cluster hire, which all of our peer UC campuses, UCLA, UC Berkeley, And UC Riverside, as well as UC Merced, have launched very splashy, and UC San Diego have launched very splashy cluster hires in anticipation of those three most competitive UCs becoming HSIs. And there's 14, 15, 10, 4 numbers in these cluster hires and Latinx studies. And so our ability to get these HSI grants, which the administration has been very proud of, rightly, is going to be endangered. It's going to shift because these, without a strategic investment in a cluster hire, these other campuses will take those people instead. But the whole thing is una vergüenza. Thanks.
Kirsten, thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn things over to Rebecca.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank Christine and everyone else, Becca, who helped organize today. And I also want to echo what Megan said about our deep commitment to racial justice, in addition to all of the specialty groups here. I think that this is an overriding issue for the university and for our society, and it's the perfect time for us to be very aggressive about trying to move forward in really substantive ways. So I wanted to first let you know that I took over this leadership of this group this fall from the very able hands of Sri Kurnawan. And so she was the one who wrote the 2018-2019 report. And the issues in the report are pretty spot on. But the biggest issue that my group faces, and it's a big group, however, the number of people coming to meetings because of the pandemic and the extra onus on everyone to just survive during the pandemic has been pretty low. So we've got I've curated the email list that Sri gave me, and we've got about 175 people on our email list. But the number one issue was childcare. It still is. It's been that way. And there's insufficient childcare. There's people were really frustrated. They said that things like not only is there not enough childcare and the plans for upcoming childcare are insufficient, but that they've been advocating for a long time for more childcare on campus, and that it's just not going anywhere except some tiny little amount in the new housing that's being planned. And I heard things like, do something, and quote, is this hopeless, question mark. A lot of frustration by people who have kids and are trying to do a full-time job as a faculty member. And by the way, we've also opened our group up to lecturers and staff as well. So, and I'm also, we're not defining what science is. So anyone who self-identifies as being in science are considered, and engineering and math, of course, women in STEM. We've got people in lots of different disciplines, but they're very, very, very frustrated. And as a result, during the pandemic, our Zoom meetings and such, the fact that people can't get childcare is actually preventing them from even voicing their concerns about childcare and other things, because they are just completely overwhelmed. I'm getting emails from people saying, I really, really want to participate. This is such an important issue, but I can't come to the Zoom meetings because I've got to deal with both childcare and teaching and research and, putting food on the table. So that is the number one issue by a long shot. And people were saying that there needs to be real substantial investment on campus for childcare. And it's not just for women in STEM, it's for men in any discipline, women in any discipline, and grad students and staff. So that was the biggest thing that people talked about. The second biggest issue, as many people have talked about here, is the invisible work issue and unequal service. And people were quite frustrated. They said that maybe service needs to be incentivized so that people actually get some type of A, recognition, and B, something back for all that huge amount of effort they're putting into service. Another issue was mentorship, and people recognized that the faculty mentorship program is great, but there weren't enough mentors, and people wanted mentors closer to their own field. So in some cases, they wanted mentors of the same gender or whatever, and actually the mentorship people are working with me to try to find more mentors now, but it's kind of, it would have been really helpful in the fall to move forward with that rather than now. And then dual career issues, that there used to be an actual office with someone working on trying to help people who come to campus find employment for their significant other, and that is pretty much gone out the window and is really a challenge in terms of not just recruiting, but retention of, in our case, strong women faculty. But I'm sure it's true in all the different groups. And then lastly, housing, and particularly for new faculty who come here. And the current real estate market is, of course, if you're not looking at the real estate market, you're lucky, but it's completely insane. It's really, really expensive. And I myself lost my home to the CZU fire, and I've been here for 31 years. I have built up equity, and I'm finding it hard to find a house. And so a year and a half later, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm still in a 400 square foot studio apartment with my husband trying to find a house. But for new faculty, it's much, much worse, because at least I've got a higher salary and I've got some equity. And so this is absolutely critical in terms of being able to recruit people of color, women, anybody that we want, in terms of getting them to be able to thrive in Santa Cruz. The other thing is that networking is really not as viable as it is without, during the pandemic, when we're doing Zoom meetings, we kind of lose the networking aspect of having, an event where people can go talk one-on-one. And we're looking forward to the time when we can all safely gather in a real space and have networking, which is such a valuable thing for all of our groups. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone who presented. I just wanted to say that we don't have a whole lot of time left over for Q&A. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass things over to Becca Karubius, but I want to ask that if any of you had comments, questions that you wanted to pose, please place in the chat. Please email Becca and me. And one thing that we can do is we can share them with the heads of all of the groups and arrange for a follow-up conversation about how to move the discussion forward. So the discussion isn't limited just to the hour and a half that we have allocated right now. And I want to say another thing in response to what Rebecca was presenting about childcare. Even the Leadership Academy, which this campus touts as being the way that, you could make it through into the leadership of this campus, it routinely has events that go until 4 p.m. So if you have to go pick up your kid or something like this, forget about you. You know what I mean? So you cannot participate. So that already narrows down who this campus envisions as a leader. I just wanted to mention that. And yes, feel free to email me as well. Becca, did you?
Yeah. I just want to first start by just showing deep appreciation and respect for the collective work that's happening now and that's happened for many years. I feel very sort of moved and inspired by all of the reflections that you have. One thing that was really clear from the interviews that we did with faculty of color, understanding their experiences in university leadership, was that there was just so much more need for a collective voice around some of these issues, as folks often felt very siloed and isolated. And it felt, I think, quite lonely. And I think what they learned from some of that report is that there is a collective efforts happening here. And so even to be able to see that and give name and representation to that feels quite meaningful and a good step forward. So just thank you sincerely for all the work and reflections that you shared today. We do have limited time for discussion. So as Christine mentioned, it'd be great to post questions in the chat. I'll just start with one question as folks are reflecting and thinking about that. And we'll make sure to integrate the questions that folks have, if we don't get to them today, into the later events. the place I'd like to start is that, folks offered incredible recommendations, both big and small, for steps forward. And I think there's time in the follow-up events to really get into the weeds and details of what those structures can look like. One thing that the planning committee can do is, we have the recording today, is look back at the conversations and the reports and then synthesize what are some of the shared recommendations and structures, but also what are the distinct sort of needs of the different groups, and be able to sort of summarize that in a more in a way that feels digestible, because I recognize that today is a beginning conversation and sharing. So it's a lot to take in potentially. So the next two conversations can integrate some of those shared and distinct, I think, issues and recommendations that were communicated today. Where I would then like to start as a question is something a little broader, because I don't want the sort of takeaway message, I think, from this work to be ignored here. So the place where I'd like to start, and then again, we'll move to an audience question, is, our campus is serving an increasingly diverse student demographic, and, the mission of serving this, right? This idea from moving beyond just enrolling students of color, first generation students, low income students, to actually holistically serving their needs. And that means various things, right? And scholars have written about that as a multifaceted framework. That mission of serving this is crucial for the organizational identity of our campus, right? And so I think the larger question here is, from your deep perspectives and reflections that you've engaged in, I'm just sort of curious on, what do you want the campus leaders to recognize about the link between the efforts of minoritized faculty along many dimensions of identity and social positions and serving this? So what is the larger message you want to communicate today in the space that we have around that link for you, especially as you've reflected on this in the last couple of years? So if anybody just wants to unmute and maybe offer that, and then we can move to an audience question if we have one.
Well, if I may,
go ahead, Alice.
Oh, thank you, Courtney. I was just going to say something, pretty simple and obvious, which is, we offer our dedication. We've got the brain power. We do not have the institutional power. And, back to what I said earlier, I want there to be some formal recognition. There has been communication and there has been acknowledgement. That's great. But I do see, we hear these words a lot, kind of marginalization. We're generating all of this for ourselves. We are tasked with solving the problems ourselves, and we do need the institution to work with us.
Thank you, Alice. Courtney, do you want to add and chime in?
Yeah, just thinking about this idea of serving this. During one of our recent Black faculty meetings, we were talking about invisible labor and the idea of service, and maybe members of our demographic engaging in more service than what is often advised faculty engage in. And we talked about it being a labor of love was one quote in explaining why we engage in service. And then, I just want to highlight that I think for us, it's like we're really dedicated to trying to create community that we can all survive and thrive in. And that's faculty, students, and staff, like everybody all together. And I think that that's something, I don't know, that I personally, as a Black person, feel like is my part of my charge as an academic, especially given the history of Black people in education systems in this country too. And also another thing I want to mention is we were talking also about the need to survey faculty around their service efforts and ask them why they engage in the service they do, so that there's more agency around faculty. There's more agency that faculty have in telling their own stories around why they engage in the service they do. And findings from those kinds of interviews could help inform policy around how service gets weighed, around, maybe acknowledging the importance of service more.
Thank you, Courtney. Megan, I see your.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thanks to all of you again. And I just wanted to reiterate that I think I often pop into these conversations from sort of an almost parenthetical position to say and remind people that we have a pretty extreme problem when it comes to the representation of disabled faculty and giving and serving the enormous numbers of our students who have disabilities, to providing them mentorship and guidance and having that kind of scholarship also thrive here at UCSC. So if I have one message to leadership, I just want to say we exist. And what happens with us could matter for everyone on campus. That's the other message that our group, it really is about. And if we learned anything from COVID, it was about the necessity of disability as a perspective that's not just about disabled folks, but is about networks of care and support. So I just want to add that.
Thank you, Megan. Kirsten?
Katie said something really wonderful about place-based knowledge. And I think one thing that I didn't get to at all is how the specific experiences of California students and their specific communities, speech communities, et cetera, are not necessarily perfectly aligned with the way that Latinx faculty interest is distributed. So I think attention to that would be really wonderful.
Thank you. Katie and Rebecca, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo some of the thoughts about thinking about the institutional power and the structures and kind of supporting, this work. Because at the same time, I recognize that in many ways, IFN, for instance, when it comes to and thinking about Indigenous studies hires, like we do want to be a part of that, right? It's not that we don't want to be in the room or hand it over to anybody else. We do want to be a part of that. And simultaneously, understanding that we just want to be recognized for our service and to have the kind of structural support to make those things happen. So, and I think those are some of the thoughts that other folks have spoken to as well.
Thank you all. I see value in thinking about sort of these larger pictures as folks sort of leave the conversation today. And again, we'll revisit these in the next two events. We don't have that much time, but there is a really important question in the chat that I think if we could just make a little space for, and then we can move to a closing remark. So Mika, I know you asked a question, so I just want to see if you want to say anything more, but I'll just read it for the audience. So how can untenured junior faculty respond to full faculty who are totally ignorant of and hostile to issues of racial justice? And then you mentioned a personal experience where you arrived 4 years ago about what program director was totally hostile and refuses to do anything to address the gendered and racial harassment that we've experienced in Whiteness. So I just want to offer maybe a little space to sort of take that in. And if folks in the working groups have, talked about that in the groups, and if you have any thoughts right now, obviously we can unpack that in the time that we have. But I think this is something that is, embedded deeply within structures of whiteness as an ideology that we will revisit in the next two conversations. So I'll just open it up to see if anybody has immediate reflections.
Can I just say really briefly, the document that we created in AFDW last year was actually intentionally meant to be almost like a script for exactly those moments in department meetings when junior faculty are feeling like at a loss for words and maybe bullied and maybe like it's emotionally charged. And so it's not a total answer, but if you go to that document, we've actually created an almost dialogue where you can see things that people often say in these contentious moments, and it provides actually even some language. We were hoping that it would provide support for exactly these kinds of interactions. That link will be at the Center for Racial Justice Center. It's not a solution, but it was meant to support some of that work.
So, Misha asked, really thank you so much, Megan. We'll definitely make sure to have that available. But Misha asked such an important question, which is how do we build solidarity? So, like I appreciate what Kirsten was saying too, that within any one group, there is, oftentimes so much internal diversity along class and other lines. And within the AAPI group, we have often noted that we do not have PI represented. And, so like, how do we even begin as a campus to materialize this as, how do we materialize this on a campus that is facing the Pacific, right? Like, how does this become a kind of ethical problem that is all of our responsibility? But I wanted to say that Misha was saying, like, how do we build solidarity among these different groups? And also, the administration set up different groups. And in the first instance, it was like, coffee, tea, and lunch, but then these sort of emerged. I think what's so interesting is to see how these groups have emerged, the critiques that have emerged, the kind of powerful analyses, the recommendations that have come forward. And so one thing that, I would just say is the conversation is not over. We're going to have 2 other events. I put this in the chat. On April 1st, we have an event, and this is calling out whiteness. And this is going to be an event that features Becca Covarrubias and Kat Quinteros presenting on their study and their report by the same name. And this will be followed by the divisional deans or representatives from the divisional offices responding to the report and offering recommendations. Okay, so this is another sort of step. And then there will be another event that's tentatively scheduled, depending on the schedules of the availability of some of the invitees. It's tentatively scheduled for May 13th. These are all Fridays. They would take place at noon. And this is the Recognizing Invisible Labor event. And we will have people from other campuses come and speak about policy changes that they have recommended and or implemented. We'll have people who have been doing that work here speaking as well. And we hope this will open up to a really interesting conversation. But I also want to say that among us, I hope that if you don't mind, the CRJ will reconvene the heads of the groups for further conversation. And I think that, this is a time when it's really imperative that we strategize, that we also have a say about how the VC of DEI emerges as a position on this campus, and to ensure that whoever occupies that position is attentive to and responsive to everything that has been raised here today. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank our speakers and thank you so much for holding down the work that you do. And it's not enough to have these words of gratitude. I think that we need to think of material solutions. And I think that we need to think about cluster hires, staff positions. We have to think about all of this. And I also want to say that what we didn't discuss here, and this has been going on a bit in the chat, is that there are lecturers who are part of many of these groups. There's also staff. And I think that we have to think structurally across the different silos, not just of the groups, but across the different sort of worker positions within the university to ensure that there is a structural solution that addresses things in the most holistic way possible. But just again, thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you. I'm seeing that some of the deans came out. We appreciate that greatly. Yeah, we really do. And thank you for supporting this very important series and this, this is a long overdue set of very important conversations. Thank you all. Again, thank you again also to Becca, who has been co-organizing this with me, as long as the planning team. We've been working for many, many months on this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Becca and Christine.